Okay, so this is the start of our first video lecture. For this particular one, I need you to have the packet that we started on during our first face-to-face meeting. I know that you have your other packet as well. We're actually going to hold off on that and kind of tie up the loose ends that we have on that first packet. So go ahead and grab that. And when we initially went through the packet in class, there were some things that I had skipped over intentionally, and I'm going to pull those back in as we move through things this evening. So looking at your packet, we had talked through the different levels of biological organization, how we build up from the cells to the tissues, tissues to organs, organs form organ systems form the organism as a whole. And then we kind of glossed over the different organ systems that we have within the human body. So I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about those and kind of highlighting the major things that they do. We're not going to, like I said, spend a huge amount of time on this, but we'll do more specific things as we get into them going over the course of first and second semester. But I did want to touch on them for just a second. So if you go back to your packets, just after the slides where we talked about the levels of organization, it does then get into the organ systems. And so with the human body, we have a total of 11 organ systems that are going to work together collaboratively to carry out all the functions that we need to do on a daily basis in order to stay alive. The biggest thing with the organ systems that we have is that they have to be able to communicate with each other. So they have to know what's going on in the other organ systems just to make sure that things are functioning properly, that things are going the way that they're supposed to. And then if something is going wrong, then there is a need to get things kind of back online and make sure that they're working the way that they're supposed to. So it's a constant balancing system. The amount of communication that has to go on within the human body is absolutely amazing. It's not something that there's really ever downtime from, because something is always going to be changing, something's going to elevate, something's going to drop, and then it's that work to get the body back to where it needs to be. So looking at the integumentary system, obviously, when we talk about the integumentary system, most people would be able to very easily recognize the skin as being part of that system. But there are also all the other structures that you have that are embedded in the skin that are going to be part of the system as well. So looking at your hair follicles, the sweat glands, the oil glands, fingernails, and all of that. And as I said, as we get into this chapter, as we move through the semesters, we'll talk more specifically about how all those things are formed and what they do specifically, but just kind of introducing them at a low level today. So the function of the integumentary system. One of the biggest things that people don't realize about the integumentary system is that it's actually going to be your barrier. It's your first line of protection against infection and disease. And it's basically this blanket that's going to create a barrier between the external world and your internal world. It's also going to, as I mentioned, being that blanket type structure, help to maintain your body temperature and make sure that it's always regulated where it's supposed to be. And then throughout your skin, you have tons of different types of receptors that are going to pick up on different types of sensory information that are coming into your body. And they relay that sensory information to your central nervous system so that you guys can process it and figure out how you need to respond to that. The skeletal system and the muscular system, they work side by side. Neither one of these systems can fully do what it needs to do without the other one. And so they are very much a partnership. When you look at the muscles, or the muscular system, excuse me, the biggest structure that you have here by far is going to be the muscles themselves, which would make sense. You have a total of 640-ish muscles, and there's not a specific count because there's different ways that different resources will count some of the muscles. In one place, they will count a muscle as being 1, and in other places, they will count that same muscle as being 2. Again, more specific when we get into the actual chapter, but we get kind of a range on the number of muscles in the human body. Very rarely will you see a specific count on that because a lot of people realize and understand that muscles are counted somewhat differently from one place to the next. With the skeletal system working alongside that muscular system, it's going to help support the body. It's going to offer protection and assist with the muscles to account for the movement that we're able to carry out. The next two systems that we have, the nervous and the endocrine, the reason that these two are going to be hand in hand is because the nervous system is really what monitors the entire body as a whole. It is able to get information and feedback from all of the other body systems, and because of that, it then can determine what changes need to be made to get your body on track and keep it working the way that it is supposed to. Now, the endocrine system is in large part made of hormones, which are our body's form of communication. We want to communicate with somebody else, we pick up our phone and we use that as our means of communication. Our internal structures, they are going to use these hormones from the endocrine system to be able to send a message from point A to point B. And that is how they communicate. That is how changes are going to take place within the body, again, to maintain order and get things back on track when things start to go wrong. The next structure, or the next system that we have, is the cardiovascular system. And with the cardiovascular system, we have the heart itself, we have the blood, and then we have different types of blood vessels. Now, I wish they had put the respiratory system right next to it in this layout, because the respiratory system is going to be the partner system for the cardiovascular system. When we get oxygen in, most people assume that that oxygen is going to our lungs, and once it gets to the lungs, from there we just kind of, or most people don't pay attention to the major goal of that oxygen being in our body. And so once we get it to the lungs, now we have to get it over into the bloodstream and allow the bloodstream to carry it to all of the cells so that they can get the materials that they need. So very much a partnership between the cardiovascular and the respiratory system. Lymphatic system, most people refer to this as the immune system. These are all the structures that is going to take to, again, help monitor what's going on in the body, find things that are not supposed to be in the body, and then figure out how to deal with them and eliminate them before they have a chance to really become something that is going to do us harm. Now, we do get sick from time to time, that's very obvious, but when you consider the amount of stuff that we come in contact with on a daily basis, if you consider how much stuff is living on the surface of our body right now, it is absolutely amazing that we are not sick all of the time. So yes, there are breakdowns in the system every now and again, and we do come down with something, but when you consider that and put it in proportion to how much we actually come in contact with, our immune system does an amazing job. The next two systems that we have are the digestive and the excretory. So with the digestive, when we put food into our body, the food as it goes in is actually too big for our body to do anything with. So the process of digestion is actually going to be to take that food and break it down into small enough pieces that we can actually do something with it. And part of understanding this is actually going to come in our chemistry chapter, because one of the things that we will talk about in chemistry is how we access and tap into energy that is held in bonds, especially the bonds of the foods that we are eating. And kind of, like I said, through that chemistry chapter, we'll gain a little bit of an understanding of how the process of digestion and why the process of digestion is so important. Once we take that food or that material in, we're not going to use 100% of it. Nothing in the human body, nothing in the living world, nothing in the machine world is 100% efficient when it does any type of work. And so when that is the case, you are going to have some sort of waste product that has to be eliminated from whatever it is, whether it's the human body or your car. That waste product must be eliminated so that it doesn't build up and cause the body or whatever you're dealing with to break down. So the urinary system, and I really would look at this as the excretory system, because we're looking at all of the ways that we get rid of waste. But that's what the excretory system is. It's taking all those waste products that our body has accumulated through the work that it does and finding a way to efficiently get rid of it so that it doesn't build up in our system and cause any problems. The last one that we have there is the reproductive system, both the male and female. These will conclude the end of second semester, talking about the reproductive systems, the structures that we see there, and how they will work to create a generation past our own. So we talked about the process of homeostasis and maintaining that internal level within our bodies so that things are working the way that they're supposed to in order, again, to keep us alive and keep us going. I would like you guys to drop to your directional terms. We didn't get into the terminology, but you do have a couple of slides that kind of reference and go over the different directional terms that we can use when referring to things that apply to the body. So if you start in the very center of the picture, you have superior and inferior. Superior is going to indicate something that is positioned above a particular structure. Inferior would indicate that it is positioned below. Posterior and dorsal are both ways to reference the back of something, while anterior and ventral are going to reference the front side of something. For the two terms cranial and caudal, cranial is going to indicate that you are closer to the head of the structure, while caudal is going to refer to being closer to the tail. The right-hand version that you guys have talks about lateral and medial. Medial means that it is on the midline or towards the center. Lateral means it is to the side, so it's away from the center. And then the last terms that you have there are proximal and distal. Now for proximal and distal, they are referencing the position of something as it pertains to the core of the body. So proximal comes from the word proximity, which means closer to. Distal comes from the word distant, which means further away. So when we look at the leg, you have the term proximal close to the hip, you have the term distal close to the toes, because the hip is closer to the core of the body. It is in closer proximity to the trunk. So we would refer to that as the proximal end of the leg. Distal is further away from where the leg attaches to the core or the trunk of the body, and so we give that the distal terminology. Same thing for the arm. Proximal and distal. Proximal would be the shoulder end because that is closer to where the arm attaches to the core. And then the distal would be the fingers because they are further away from where the arm attaches to the trunk of the body. When we also reference the human body, we have different ways to identify the different sections or different ways that we can cut the body. You have what is known as the frontal or the coronal plane. You have the transverse plane, and then you also have the sagittal. So different ways that we can cut into the body so that we can analyze and look at the internal structures. If you are cutting a body so that it is in a frontal plane, that is going to give you a cut that is going to give you a front and a back portion. So coronal plane or a frontal plane, they mean the same thing. It's going to indicate that you've cut the body in half. And in doing that, you have a front side and you have a back side. If you do a transverse cut, this is now going to cut the body so that you have a top portion and you have a bottom portion. And then the third way that you can cut the body is called a sagittal plane. And if you do a sagittal cut through the body, again, you're going to cut it in half, but you would have a left half and you would have a right half of the body. So essentially, just different ways of cutting the body and opening it up so that you can see the internal structures. It's the view or the vantage point that you're going to get from that cut. So frontal plane, you're going to get a front and a back half of the body. Sagittal plane, you are getting a right and a left side of the body. A transverse plane or cut, you are going to get a top and a bottom. The last thing that I need to talk to you guys about is the different cavities that we have in the human body. So we have lots of different cavities and they are broken down into different levels of major and minor. So for this particular topic, we're going to focus on the major cavities that we have within the human body. There are 5 of them, tons of minors. Okay, you have your nasal cavity, which would be a minor. You have your oral cavity, which would be a minor. We're not focusing on those. So please understand that you have all types of cavities that we're not going to discuss for this particular talk. We are just focusing on the big ones. So for the 5 cavities that are classified as being major cavities, you have the cranial cavity, which would be located in the head, and it only contains the brain. So it has one structure and one structure only. So the cranial cavity, if you think about where the cranium is located, that is going to possess the brain. The second cavity that we have is the the vertebral cavity that possesses the spinal cord. And then we have the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity is going to be anything that is sitting superior or above the diaphragm muscle. Now, the diaphragm muscle is a sheet of muscle, talked about it briefly the other night, that is going to run all the way from the left side of the body to the right side of the body, all the way from the front to the back. And it completely divides us into the upper chest cavity and the lower abdominal cavity. So organs basically sit right on top or right below this. They come in very close contact. And we will hear a lot about the diaphragm as we move through the year. The thoracic cavity, the main highlights that you would have here is going to be the heart, the lungs that make up that chest cavity. Sitting just below the diaphragm, you have the abdominal cavity, and this is going to contain your stomach, your liver, your spleen, your pancreas, part of your intestinal tract. So a lot of very important structures that you have sitting in that abdominal cavity. And then the 5th cavity is the pelvic cavity. Pelvic cavity is going to house a little bit of the intestinal tract, will mainly take care of or have the reproductive organs. So the 5 cavities are the cranial, the vertebral, thoracic, abdominal, and the pelvic. Now again, this is another place where you will see a little bit of a difference. Some places will very distinctly have the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. Others will blend them together into the abdominal pelvic cavity. Now on this particular one, it shows it both ways, but you have very distinct things that are going on in the abdominal cavity compared to the pelvic cavity. And so typically when we talk about them, we will keep them separate from each other. All right, so that is the end of our first video lecture that you guys are going to work with. So I post it, and then tomorrow you will have another link that will pertain to something that you need to accomplish throughout this week. So since this is not a face-to-face meeting, we still put in the time equivalent. So between the video and what I'm asking you to do for an assignment on this week, we should take up that time that we are not meeting in a classroom face-to-face. If you have any questions, please let me know. This video is a little bit shorter than what the future ones will be, just because it's our first one, kind of getting used to how it works and things like that. And then if there's any questions, like I said, I just wanted you guys to get a little bit of a feel for it this first time around. So video goes out today, assignment will go out tomorrow. Make sure that you guys are checking Blackboard. And if you have any questions between now and when we meet again, please let me know.